And we're back for episode 4. ProfessorMichaelWelch.com introduces the course, Torture and Human Rights. And in this segment, we're going to briefly go over each of the readings, just in terms of a brief snapshot as to the content and the general direction that these writings take. And the first is an article that I titled American Painology. So this is where I'm trying to combine words or invent words that capture this process of scientific applications to torture and interrogation. This is a critique of scientific torture. Questionable tactics in America's war on terror continue to undergo scrutiny due to their threats to human rights, chief among them enhanced interrogation and torture. Indeed, a growing chorus of criticism has been leveled at the political, legal, and ethical considerations of those policies and practices. Scholars, nonetheless, have neglected other important aspects of the controversy. For instance, the extent to which modern torture has been influenced by so-called scientific claims involving the effectiveness and appropriateness of certain procedures. Filling the void, this analysis explores the invention of modern torture as it draws on behavioral and psychological research in developing a new paradigm of pain. Delving into the assertions of enhanced interrogation, the critique focuses on science, studies, perspective aimed at deciphering the allure of science in policing as well as in the war on terror. Such scientification, as discussed herein, reinforces the illusion that the state's capacity to unveil the truth is infallible. Infallible. Taken for granted or given the benefit of the doubt. It's very often a psychological feature of denial that we will talk about in this article and others. But again, the emphasis here is on science, in quotation marks, and the study of pain, inflicting pain, no-touch torture, do not leave marks, evidence of injuries, of harm to the body. And later in the semester, we're going to talk more about the theory of the body by way of Michel Foucault. The next article on our list of readings is The Illusion of Truth-Seeking. Let's briefly summarize this. Illusions in Truth-Seeking. The perils of interrogation and torture in the war on terror. As the Bush administration reached its closing moments, many Americans were left wondering how their government spiraled down the path of institutionalized brutality. Many facets of the war on terror, the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, the opening of Guantanamo Bay, and the use of torture, continue to be a genuine source of outrage for concerned citizens. Several political leaders, however, remained defiant. In an exit interview, Vice President Dick Cheney admitted that he was directly involved in approving the use of torture by the CIA. He was asked about the treatment of KSM, who, while being held in a secret CIA prison, was waterboarded over 100 times. Did you authorize the tactics that were used against KSM? Cheney responded, I was aware of the program, certainly, and it involved help getting the process cleared. That is, the agency, in effect, came in and wanted to know what they could and couldn't do, and they talked to me, and as well as others, to explain what they wanted to do, and I supported it. The reporter further inquired, in hindsight, do you think any of those tactics that were used, including waterboarding against KSM and others, went too far? Cheney said unapologetically, I don't. Some legislators and human rights lawyers have pressed forward for calls of criminal prosecution against Cheney and former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld for ordering interrogation tactics that violate federal and international laws banning torture. There's more. We are then going to look further at this notion of science in the realm of psychology. Doing special things to special people in special places. Psychologists in the CIA torture program. This is a phrase that was taken out of a memo that was circulating between those coordinating the enhanced interrogation program, doing special things to special people in special places. Since 2004, detailed correspondence between the American Psychological Association and the Central Intelligence Agency revealed the extent to which operational psychologists coordinated with the Bush administration's enhanced interrogation program. Key revelations exposed the ethical maneuvering intended to defend the participation of certain psychologists in interrogation, abuse, and torture, including waterboarding. This critique takes aim at the controversy over psychological planning and subsequent practice of torture during the Bush administration. Analysis is informed by Robert J. Lifton and his book, The Nazi Doctors, Medical Killing and the Psychology of Genocide. Doing special things to special people in special places. And here's another article. When you go to your packet located on the Canvas page, this will not be in there because there will be a link and you will download it yourself and put it into your list of things to read. And this is a project I worked on in Oñati, in Spain, at the Oñati International Institute for the Sociology of Law. Very interesting research institute. Highly recommend researchers and scholars to examine their website for possible opportunities to do research there. This was my project. So as to immunize the Bush White House against cases involving the abuse of detainees held under the War on Terror, its legal advisors warped laws prohibiting torture. More recently, evidence reveals that the CIA colluded with the American Psychological Association to rewrite the ethics policy that would enable psychologists to participate in harsh interrogations as well as torture. The shift from consultant to that of hands-on operational psychologist marks a significant development in what is described herein as clinical torture. Moreover, the adoption of a new role in the interrogation of torture programs demonstrates the dynamics of drift in the atrocity triangle that features perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. Again, this is the atrocity triangle. And we use the word drift is this movement, this migration from one position in the triangle to another. Specifically, psychologists progress from bystanders to becoming perpetrators in ways that abandon their obligation to do no harm. This article explores the nuances of the atrocity triangle and the atrocity-producing situation set forth by Stan Cohen at the London School of Economics and Robert J. Lifton. Implications to the prosecution of group offenders are discussed throughout. So that's the Oñati article, clinical torture, drifting in the atrocity triangle. Now, later in the semester, we are also going to a couple of other cities. And we're going to spend some time in Belfast, in the north of Ireland, where I've conducted research. Years ago, when I was based at the London School of Economics, I flew over to Belfast for a stretch to examine their the city, which is heavily muraled, but also heavily fortified. It's it's one of the most partitioned cities in Europe, if not the world, separating these communities during the Troubles, and so-called groups that are, to oversimplify, the Catholic Nationalist Republicans or the Unionist, Loyalist Protestants. And this is the gate. This is a stretch of the peace wall, and we're going to talk about detainees that were held by British forces And these detainees in particular that we're going to discuss were hooded during most of their period of confinement. They became known as the hooded men, and they were subjected to what is known as the 5 techniques, which has become a major source of litigation in Europe. And we're going to talk more about that along with the hooded men when we go to Belfast. And we're going to talk about science, the science of interrogation by the British forces. And the last leg will take us to Berlin, to Hamburg, and Munich, Germany. In 2019, I was living in Berlin to conduct more field work. And the parallel between Belfast and Berlin is the wall. Belfast being heavily partitioned, and the wall of Berlin that was constructed by the East Berlin authorities, the dictatorship, an extension of the Soviets. And this is the wall, and we're standing on an observation platform. And so this was preserved. And what we see on the interior of the wall is a watchtower, which was reconstructed for viewers from the observation platform. And this was the death strip. Anyone who was making a run from the east, where I'm pointing here, to the west would be gunned down. It was a shoot-to-kill policy. And we're going to talk more about the wall and its significance in separating Berlin, but we're also going to visit the Stasi Museum. And the Stasi was the secret police of East Germany, and they were modeled after the KGB. And they adopted a paradigm known as disintegration. Whereas the Nazis relied on extermination, the Stasi relied on a technique called disintegration, which was modeled after certain psychological techniques that, rather than imposing physical harm on the body, they would pressure the body psychologically through stress and pressure that would contribute to a mental state of disintegration. Now, next segment, we're going to talk about the syllabus.